Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to present the science behind the Healthspan code at this edition of the World Stem Cell Summit. These are my disclosure. I'm a consulting advisor, SAB or board member of all of this company. Many of them are related to the speech presentation that I'll do today. The problem of Healthspan medicine is to address this big challenge. That is that in 20 years, the population over 65 will double, and this population will suffer, 90% of them will suffer from one chronic disease, and over 75% will suffer of two or more comorbidities. Age-related diseases include diabetes, respiratory disease, COVID-19 complication, long COVID, neurodegeneration, cardiovascular, osteoarthritis, cancer, to name a few. And they account also for 90% of healthcare costs or expenditures that are now like over 3.8 trillion a year in the US alone, or approximately 20% of the GDP of United States. And with aging, there is a progressive loss of the ability to repair and regenerate tissues. So this is a situation that is very well linked to our ability, stem cell progenitor and tissue repair and regeneration. So during the COVID pandemic, it painfully emerged that these diseases, together with advanced age, are also impressive risk factor for the severe disease progression. And in the 21st century, we were characterized by at least two other pandemics, not just the viral pandemic of COVID, but sick or unhealthy longevity and autoimmune diseases. So unhealthy longevity is represented by the decline in health span, in healthy lifespan, that occur in the last decades of life, and that is increasing the cost of healthcare, affecting, as we said, over 90% of people beyond age 65. But the other pandemic is autoimmune diseases that maybe we may be less aware, but affects 20% of the population in the United States with 100 different pathologies. And it was once believed that modern medicine could continue to extend and improve the lifespan of humankind. But the first red flag came from the US, where in the last 3 years, life expectancy has decreased instead of improved. And for the first time, it has been realized that children born today could live less than their parents. So this is a big challenge emerging, and I had the honor to serve as a curator of the Italian edition of the book Lifespan of David Sinclair. And when I was asked to be the curator of this book, I was a little hesitant because it was a very strong anti-paradigmatic, paradigm shifting, and if you want, a little heretic concept, the concept that why we age and why we don't have to. And incidentally, David had the courage to publish this book in advance of a major publication in Nature that actually, soon after the publication of the book, actually the year after, sort of confirmed some of his most provocative theses advanced in the book Lifespan. And in Lifespan, why we age and why we don't have to, aging is presented as a degenerative process that leads to tissue dysfunction and death. And a proposed cause is the accumulation of epigenetic noise that disrupts gene expression patterns, leading to decreases in tissue function and regenerative capacity. Changes in DNA methylation pattern over time form the basis of the aging clocks. But whether older individuals retain the information needed to restore these patterns, and if so, whether this could be reversible and improved tissue function is was still not known. Over time, the central nervous system loses function and regenerative capacity. And using the eye as a model of central nervous system, David Sinclair was able to reverse blindness and restore vision using an ectopic expression of 3 of the 4 Yamanaka genes to the retina, OCT4, SOX2, and KLF4 genes. and was remarkable the results that show that you could promote axon regeneration after injury and reverse vision loss in a mouse model of glaucoma and in aged mice. So this beneficial effect of induced reprogramming in axon regeneration and vision required the DNA demethylases TET1 and TET2, and this data indicate that mammalian tissues retain a record of youthful epigenetic information encoded in part by DNA methylation that can be accessed to improve tissue function and to promote regeneration in vivo. So this was quite remarkable and gave the cover of Nature journal December 3rd, 2020, with the title Turning Back Time, Reprogramming Retinal Cell Can Reverse Age-Related Vision Loss. This was a major finding and confirmed the theory, and actually David had some problem publishing in Nature because it was questioned that this was already published in his book. So sometime, you know, prediction that you can make in a lay book or this kind of publication could actually be predictive of what eventually may be confirmed by peer-reviewed scientific publications. And following this and his lead, I decided to publish myself a book that is coming out in Italian in Italy June 14th, but hopefully will be soon available also in English in United States, and the title in English will be The Healthspan Code Beyond Gene Therapy. Like, what can we do if we don't want to use the 3 genes that David used to restore vision? Can we apply methods and strategies to improve biological age as opposed to chronological age and try to prolong healthy lifespan? The objective is not much living up to 150 or 200 years, but if you can aim at live healthy and prolong healthy lifespan, that is something that has a tremendous value also economically, because 1 year that you add of healthy lifespan will result in saving of 37 trillion to the global economy worldwide of healthcare. So why a diabetes center director gets interested in aging is that we have been dealing with accelerated aging in diabetes. I consider diabetes as a model of chronic accelerated aging, where you don't see a problem like in progeria within a short first 2 decades of age, but you lose 2 decades of life if you're diagnosed before age 10. Like this one has been published in the last Lancet. If you're diagnosed before age 10, women can lose between 14 and 20 years of age, and men 12 to 18.2 lifespan years. So this is a red flag and point out of a big issue that you have excellent survival in the first decades of life in diabetes, but then is an exhaustion pathology. This accelerated aging appears after age 35 or 40, where you see in this comparison study that we did with islet transplantation that are performed around 40 years of age, where we have a cumulative survival of 85%. Instead, in diabetes with insulin without immunosuppression, you have a cumulative survival estimated of less than 60%. So it means that this impact occurs late in life, and you can be perfectly looking healthy and be a beautiful model actress or Olympic swimmers or Miss America. And but then if you try to do surgery, maybe you have someone that looks perfect at age 45, you try to do an anastomosis, vascular anastomosis, and the arteries are frail, or they look like the artery of someone who could have 60 or 65 years of age. So we believe that this accelerated aging is subsequent to exhaustion of reparative and regenerative mechanism, and exhaustion of stem cell and progenitor cell repair mechanisms that can bring to a series of chronic complications of the well-known chronic complications of diabetes. So the objective of targeting aging and the Healthspan code is to see if you can compress this period of decline. So we've been very good improving lifespan at any cost, and now it's costing 3.8 trillion a year in the United States, but it's not necessarily quality of life. So we've been pretty good up to 3 years ago, because now lifespan has been decreasing in the last 3 years. As I mentioned, our children may be the first one to live less than their parents. The goal of Healthspan medicine is to aim at the square wave. That is, you live healthy, your full potential, then you go run your marathon or do whatever exercise activity you prefer at age 120, 130, 110, whenever. You go to sleep, you don't wake up. That's the perfect square wave. The implication, sorry, this is the data that show islet transplantation, 85% cumulative survival in that age group compared to insulin therapy without immunosuppression, with less than 60%. This was not a randomized prospective trial. It would be impossible to do it because it would require probably 400 people followed for 20 years, but are data available in the literature. So here again, economic value of targeting aging has been estimated at, if we can improve 10 years of healthy aging, would be $367 trillion, and 1 year just around $38 trillion. So think at the investment that you could do in other critical challenges of global economy, from global warming to hunger and other crises that affect us even today. So from discovering aging research to therapeutics for healthy aging, this has been reviewed in a recent publication in Nature, and there is a very nice timeline and review of all the elements from the 1930s calorie restriction to enhance lifespan in mice and rats to the more recent term, it's lifespan enhancement by calorie restriction, the birth of geroscience in 2007, the sirtuin activator to extend the lifespan in yeast, look on how calorie restriction enhanced life and health span in rhesus monkey, getting more translational. Rapamycin has been introduced as a potential life extension strategy, as metformin has been recently also proposed. Then targeting senescence and the xenotherapeutics, senolytics, clinical trials ongoing, and moving forward in the future to personalized aging therapies, more clinical trial ongoing, and the big advancement in biomarker of aging and their characterization of biological aging as a clock as opposed to chronological aging that shows how someone at age 60 could be actually biologically 70-year-old or could be 30-year-old or 40-year-old, depending on Healthspan code, Healthspan medicine intervention. Now, we've been involved in working on mesenchymal stem cell research at the Diabetes Research Institute for several decades, initially with bone marrow, chimerism, human and non-human primate studies, the development of the Miami cells, studies in organ transplantation to prevent rejection, the first randomized trial in kidney transplantation to improve outcome in kidney transplant. And then we started studying them in diabetes with a randomized control trial, more recently in Alzheimer's disease. And we published recently the 8-year follow-up of the randomized control trial in diabetes, and most recently also in COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic was an unprecedented pandemic. I don't have to remind anyone in this audience, but we were approved by FDA, authorized to move forward with IND in type 1 diabetes, and we were already ongoing in Alzheimer's disease. And when COVID pandemic emerged, we were blocked completely from trials in diabetes, and we switched very rapidly the production and did a very fast fundraising to start a trial in the severe forms of COVID-19 ARDS, people in the ICU and intubated. And it was thanks to the North American building trade unions and the Cure Alliance and many supporters, we were able to expand the production and start in weeks a clinical trial that was quite remarkable, was published in Stem Cell Translational Medicine, and resulted in like 100% survival of patients below age 85, 91% survival overall, compared to the randomized double-blind control group where patients were infused with the solution and without the mesenchymal stem cell obtained from the umbilical cord, and that unfortunately had less than 50% survival, and with the best standard of therapy available then, and the mortality back then was higher than it is today. But what was important of this study is that proved the concept and the mechanism that these cells have indeed a very strong immunomodulatory, anti-inflammatory, anti-cytokine storm activity that creates the basis and the rationale for their use also in autoimmune disease condition and in some of the other pandemics of the 21st centuries. We also had a dramatic improvement in time to recovery, with more than half of the patients who recover in 2 weeks or less in the stem cell group, while the ones who were alive in the control group still were, most of them were in the hospital at 1 month. So remarkable results, and we're happy that this trial have been authorized by FDA to move to phase 3. The IND was approved, and we completed the transfer of the sponsorship to industry that will allow us to now redirect our efforts to umbilical cord mesenchymal stem cell treatments of diabetes and for other Healthspan medicine applications. One important indication came from the long-term diabetes trial. This was a trial that we did with our collaborators in China. It was a randomized prospective trial whose initial results were reported in Diabetes Care. And in cytotherapy at the end of last year, we published the results of 8-year follow-up that show a very strong prevention effect of prevention in the control of complication. Both neuropathy, nephropathy, and retinopathy were virtually prevented in the group with the stem cell treatment, while they were still occurring in the control group as affected. And this is even more important that the improving fasting C-peptide at 1 year and at 8 years, that was marginal as a total effect, but the effect on prevention of complication raised the potential issue that this cell therapy can indeed, if they can prevent complication, they may be able also to reverse them at the beginning. And another important study that we did with Paul Robbins' group and many others was using mesenchymal stem cell and mesenchymal-derived extracellular vesicle to reduce senescence and extend health span in mouse model of aging. Here you see in the progeria how young MSC from young donors can lead to up to a 3-fold extension in lifespan, and how actually these cells, this effect is largely due to exosome extracellular vesicle and soluble factors, so that this raises potential new opportunities for therapeutic intervention also in this direction. Another very important paper that makes us think in the direction of the Healthspan code and Healthspan medicine application of these cells is that for the first time, I believe, we were able in the study, also in collaboration with our collaborators in China, to show that if you have dedifferentiation, age-related dedifferentiation of insulin-producing cells in long-term type 2 diabetes, these are islets from long-term type 2 diabetic human subjects. Sorry, I don't know why it keeps changing by itself. But it shows that if you combine now these dedifferentiated islets, it could be a result of senescence, accelerated aging, dysfunction, progressive in type 2 diabetes, But it was impressive that if you combine now these islets with mesenchymal stem cells, umbilical cord mesenchymal stem cells, they're able to bring back this aging tissue, this dedifferentiated insulin-producing cells, bring them back to produce insulin again. So if you wish, is another demonstration or proof of concept that maybe you can indeed obtain tissue rejuvenation from human tissues using cellular therapy strategies or exosomes or extracellular vesicles without having to recur to gene therapy applications. So it's just what could be studied more as an alternative approach. So now the big issue is that we often think of therapy intervention as a one shot, like do an islet transplant, do a pancreas transplant to reverse diabetes, and then the patient is cured. But actually, then you're dealing with disease recurrence. So it is so important to concentrate our efforts also on prevention, because beyond primary prevention, if someone develops a disease or an autoimmune disease or an age-related disease, and you're able to reverse it or treat it, then you have the challenge of preventing disease recurrence. So preventive healthspan medicine will be something complementary and absolutely required to have the ultimate success in any intervention or cure-focused intervention strategy. We've been working a lot on mesenchymal stem cells, but also vitamin D, omega-3, and some combination of polyphenols and sirtuin activators that are now available. These are all over the counter and all substances that can have different sources. Just having the omega-3 have to make sure they're potent and they're very pure, because coming from fish, they can be contaminated with mercury, lead, and other contaminants, but are very easy to get. They cost very little, and for this reason is also very difficult to get funding for large randomized prospective trials, because the cost of vitamin D, for example, for 2 years is like $20. So there is not, we're not talking about billion or trillion dollar molecules, and economic interest beyond this kind of strategies is very limited. What is important to note is that modulation of inflammation and hyperimmune responses and improvement of insulin sensitivity can all be related to prolongation of healthy lifespan or health span. And these are mechanisms of action that are shared by all these molecules and mesenchymal stem cells or their byproducts like extracellular vesicle. And insulin resistance, this is from the Italian book, but the causes and consequences of insulin resistance are well known by all of you. So chronic inflammation and elevated arachidonic acid over EPA ratio, low vitamin D levels, excess sugar consumption, and refined carbohydrate, an elevated ratio triglyceride HDL, oxidative stress, limited polyphenols and sirtuin activators, poor physical exercise or lack of physical exercise, obesity and central obesity and visceral obesity. And the consequences are multiple. You have accelerated aging, decreased health span. You can have a kidney disease, hepatic steatosis, cirrhosis, increased risk of cancer, Alzheimer, and neurodegenerative diseases, hypertension, accelerated arteriosclerosis, dyslipidemia, metabolic syndrome, and type 2 diabetes. So we see as a very strong index of accelerated aging. Like if you measure your insulin sensitivity, you can have an idea of your health span potential moving forward. And as we mentioned, MSC, vitamin D, omega-3, and some of the other substances we mentioned share an anti-inflammatory and immunomodulation pathway. And is modulation of inflammation and immune responses, is not blocking inflammation. As you know, it's very important to have inflammatory responses to face and defeat diseases and injury, but it's this chronic form of silent inflammation that lasts decades that shorten the healthy lifespan and the health span of individual. And We've been unfortunately evolving in the Western diets, and American diet is a perfect example of unhealthy diet in what Barry Sears has been called the perfect storm, and I call a perfect disease predisposing storm, because we have in the last decades observed an increased omega-3 level and consumption, increased refined carbohydrates, and we decrease protective factor, we decrease omega-3 in our diet, decrease polyphenols and sirtuin activators, decrease vitamin D levels, dramatic decrease in vitamin D levels. Now, there are already publications that show that omega-3 relates to the risk of death from all causes. So it's good to have a higher level of omega-3 and having a lower level of arachidonic EPA ratio. That is, arachidonic acid is a surrogate marker for omega-6 and EPA for omega-3. So the higher is this ratio, the higher is your inflammation index in your blood. And omega-3 has been also indicated to reverse autoimmune diseases, in this case, type 1 diabetes model in NOD mice, and has been a remarkable study. It's not just because of the ability to reverse diabetes, both with a gene therapy approach, a lentivirus encoding mFAT1 that convert omega-6 in omega-3 in vitro, but also supplementation with the diet of DHA and EPA of omega-3. They both reverse diabetes in all the treated NOD mice. And here you see the treated mice that maintain insulin-producing cells in green, while the control, they don't maintain. The cells are selectively destroyed by the autoimmune process. So now what was even more interesting to me is that if you take peripheral blood mononuclear cells from subjects with type 1 diabetes or normal subject, non-diabetic subject, you see something very similar. You see that if you give omega-3, DHA and EPA, you can double or more the level of regulatory T cells, and you lower dramatically the Th17, that is the autoreactive, the aggressive cells, and everything else. You lower the ratio Th1, Th2, and other markers. But if you instead increase arachidonic acid, if you increase omega-6, your Tregs goes to 0 and your Th17 goes through the roof, and so the ratio Th1, Th2. So this to me means that you lose the ability to fight triggering event of autoimmune disease condition, or you lose the ability to fight SARS-CoV-2 infection, and you can expose yourself to the risk of having an autoimmune disease. So you have an enterovirus, you don't have any more regulatory T cells, and you have your Th17 through the roof, and you're unable to fight and can develop type 1 diabetes. You have a SARS-CoV-2 and you don't have regulatory T cells, and you have your Th17 increase, you can develop the cytokine storm and the severe complication in COVID-19. And incidentally, both type 1 diabetic subject at the onset and the severe form of COVID have this ratio through the roof, arachidonic acid to EPA, and very low levels of vitamin D, which again is another element that promote tolerance at regulatory T cells, but you have to have levels above 40. We generally target between 40 and 70 nanogram milliliter, and most physician or pediatrician don't touch you if you have more than 30. But to see an effect on immunoregulation and anti-inflammatory, you need to increase more the levels without having the risk of going beyond 100 nanogram, but trying to target 40 to 70. And these are being studied now to ward off many other autoimmune diseases and also in COVID. This was an important study, the VITAL study, because they studied 26,000 patients followed by 5 years, and the original endpoint was not to look at autoimmunity, but this recent study looked at what happened to autoimmune diseases if you take vitamin D and omega-3, and it was shown that a 39 reduction in autoimmune diseases in subjects that were already taking supplementation with vitamin D for more than 2 years. And even this was done with very low doses compared to what we use in autoimmune diseases to try to reverse or halt progression. there was a clear message that we are going in the right direction with this intervention strategy and that they should be studied more. Vitamin D has been also associated with a reduced risk of all-cause mortality in diabetes. If you have higher vitamin D levels, it is associated with less risk of all-cause mortality, and it has been shown to be related to a reduced risk of morbidity and mortality in COVID-19 patients. It doesn't mean that you can cure COVID with vitamin D if you have severe COVID, but it means that if you increase your level of vitamin D, you may have a protection. And also diet supplementation, probiotic nutraceuticals are emerging like non-pharmacological strategies to try to fence and immunomodulate and have an anti-inflammatory kind of nutrition and protective substances could help mitigate the risk of progression of what I call the pandemic of the 21st century. It is for this reason that we started with European collaborators and centers in Rome, Tor Vergata and La Sapienza, San Raffaele of Rome and Istituto Superiore della Sanità. We've been studying with Professor Enrico Garaci, who had the first idea saying making us notice how bats don't have viral disease, severe viral diseases, but also they don't have autoimmune diseases, and also they live 10 times longer than animals of similar size like rat and mice, even they are not rodents. But what could be the secret of bat that they can fence all the pandemics of the 21st century and become an example of healthspan medicine? They've been able to learn and evolve in 70, 80 million years to modulate inflammation and modulate hyperimmune responses. So we initially called this the Batman project, but then I was criticized for not being gender neutral. They asked me why not Batwoman or Bathuman, so I decided to avoid the discussion in this direction. We changed the name into Fit for Pandemic, which is more gender neutral and no criticism in this direction. So Fit for Pandemic to be Fit for Healthspan is a website that we developed and is available open access, where we discuss the science behind how modulation of inflammation immunity with vitamin D3, omega-3, polyphenols, and sirtuin activators could be helpful to protect us by these hyperinflammatory responses in COVID and beyond, and how this combination of polydatin, pterostilbene onychiol could be important in this direction to promote cell regeneration, antimicrobial activity, natural extracts, activation of sirtuins that are the so-called lifespan molecules for anti-aging. So we can find the discussion of all of these factors one by one, more in detail in this study, in this review that we published recently, last year. And this is like the basis of the protocol that we propose. And we always say consult your doctors. This is not evidence-based medicine, it's just wellness-based medicine. This is what I take, or my family or friends or patient that I suggest consider discussing with their doctor this potential healthspan code intervention that include vitamin D, vitamin C if you don't eat enough fruit and vegetables, and then Zonarex omega-3 that we use because it's very highly purified, but you can find other, everything is replaceable. They're all generic substances. You can choose the one that you prefer, but just make sure it's highly purified and potent. So count how many omega-3 per gram you have and what is the level of purity for each lot. Now, this combination that we selected that is present in C500 plus, this onychiol, polydatin, and pterostilbene has been producing some remarkable results in initial study that we did with teams in Italy and the Istituto Superiore della Sanità and Rome universities, where they tested this combination, not just in influenza A virus, but also in SARS-CoV-2. And to our surprise, there was a 2-log or 99% inhibition of viral replication. And importantly, this was obtained even post-infection, after infection with SARS-CoV-2. So it means that you don't have to necessarily take the molecules as prevention. So many of us take them as a reverse aging or Healthspan remedies. But if you by any chance get affected by COVID, you could start in the first 24 hours after you become positive, and may help you in combination with omega-3 and vitamin D and vitamin C to fence and avoid disease progression. So our aim is prevent hospitalization, prevent people getting sick and needing to go to take the antivirals and ECMO or intubations or the most severe kind of remedies. This is another graphic representation of this combination of polyphenols, certain activators on viral titer, inhibition of SARS-CoV-2 replication compared to the controls of just single components. And so this is what is proposed, is just if you're turn positive, you take once 100,000 units of vitamin D, and then you double the dose of omega-3 and C500 just for 1 week, and then you go back to your Healthspan code suggested protocol, always discussing it with your physicians. So this is another interesting effect of this combination of polyphenols and sirtuin activators on a model of Parkinson's disease, and was interesting because this was just published very recently, and was a neuroblastoma cell line that was treated with a neurotoxic stimulus used to induce a model of Parkinson. And the pretreatment with this combination of polyphenols, sirtuin activator resulted in a significant reduction of inflammation, pro-inflammatory cytokines, and ROS production. Activation of extracellular signal-regulated kinases, ERK1/2, decreased apoptosis, and increased cell viability were also observed as effect. So this A5 plus treatment promoted cellular differentiation into dopaminergic neurons, and the result demonstrated the synergic and innovative efficacy of this mixture of polyphenols and sirtuin activators against Parkinson's disease cellular pathological processes. And further study will be needed to clarify the mechanism underlying this beneficial effect. Now, I say you can take this from different sources. You don't have to take C500. You don't have to take Zonarex omega-3, vitamin D. There are several formulations, and you can get supply, as I said, for 2 years for around $20. But some people say, well, why can't we take all this from healthy nutrition instead of supplements of protective substances? Well, to get the components that you get in these pills through healthy nutrition, this is the daily consumption of course, you don't want to drink 10, 12 liters of red wine a day or 27 liters of white wine a day, not just because of the deleterious effect on your liver, if you can by any chance do that, but also the calories. If you're trying to follow Healthspan code diet calorie restriction, or like control your portion and calories, of course, you cannot assume 30 to 60 kilograms of grapes, of black grapes with 21 to 39,000 calories. And so for everything else, 10 kilograms of blackberries, of ribs, 16 kilograms. Or if you want to get omega-3 that could be needed, you cannot eat 6 kilograms of lobster a day or 2 kilograms of tuna. And also not just for the calories, but because unfortunately, like if you live in Florida, for example, you can check your marine control data, but the level of mercury, lead, and contaminants in fish make you recommend eating some fish species for less than once every 2 weeks or once a week, or don't even consume that if you're pregnant, like swordfish or tuna, and so on. So yes, you could help with healthy nutrition if you're lucky enough to have access to healthy food, but you can also try to improve your Healthspan code strategy by supplementing with protective substances. So I hope I gave you a global overview on how we could try to improve our Healthspan potential while we're waiting for the final age reversal strategies from gene therapy or from cellular therapy, extracellular vesicles, metformin, rapamycin, you name it. There are many molecules currently in clinical trials, but you can also do a lot with exercise, physical activity, good nutrition, and supplementing with protective substances that are not expensive and that everyone can access consulting their physician, of course. I want to thank all the collaborators of the trials for COVID-19 with mesenchymal stem cell from the umbilical cord, especially Giacomo Lanzoni, who was also supposed to lead the phase 3 trial that is now being licensed to a company because we didn't have the 10-13 million necessary to execute the trial. We are thankful to all our collaborators worldwide, including the China team of Professor Tan and Shuming Su, who had the first result with the umbilical cord MSCs in China, and the Master and Commander Arnold Kaplan, who discovered and pioneered the use of MSC, mesenchymal stem cells, in so many diseases. And I'm so humble and honored to be able to follow Arnie in his presentation at this meeting. And thanking all the meeting at the Diabetes Research Institute that work on mesenchymal stem cells and the strategies with omega-3 and vitamin D to prevent disease progression in diabetes. And I am thankful to all of you for the attention, and to all of the people at in Italy that Professor David Della Morte, Francesca Pacifici, Valentina Rovelli, Ettore Vergata, and Enrico Garace, San Raffaele of Rome, Sapienza with Anna Teresa Palamara, who is now the equivalent of Tony Fauci at NIH, at the Istituto Superiore della Sanità, Professor Paola Stefanelli, and Marta De Angeli, and Lucia Nelcione. So I thank all of these collaborators and all of the funding agencies that make our work possible, especially for the MSC, the North American Building Trades Union, the Cure Alliance, and the Barilla Family and Foundation. Thank you very much for your attention.